sure many of you are coming from straight from the performance, as was LaTasha, but let me formally introduce artist extraordinaire and someone who I'm so proud to call my very good friend, LaTasha Barnes. So we've been tasked with talking about the history of jazz dance in 45 minutes, and that's not real. So we're gonna just sort of let the conversation go where it goes. We're really gonna approach this as a conversation and less of a sort of interview, but we will definitely leave time at the end for you to ask whatever questions you might have. We're really fortunate in that we work in the same idiom, and so I think there's a lot of richness to talk about. But for those who don't know, why don't we start with your history and how you come into being really grounded in these dance forms, as opposed to any other dance forms.
Wow. Right out the gate. Honestly, I guess I'll start with my mom's favorite joke that I was dancing before I was breathing. Some people say unfairly. My mom was an athlete and a dancer, and my dad was a DJ. So I was quite literally getting it all in utero. My mom likes to joke that I would throw off her groove as she was at the parties trying to rock out with my dad, and that she would have to take a seat. But if she didn't sit next to the speaker, I would still be...
Always a soloist from the beginning.
Always a soloist. But once she got close to the music, close to the bass, then I would be in agreement with everybody and everything. Little metaphor there. Yeah. And my great-grandmother also was a dancer. Unbeknownst to me when I was growing up with her, but, she kind of... Anybody have Southern grandmothers, they kind of leak things out every now and then in conversation. You're like, I'm sorry, what? And she once told me, my friends and I saved up some money to go up to New York and dance with some fancy feet, dancers. I was like, fancy feet? She said, yeah, happy feet or something. Sarah's St. Thomas Ballroom. I was like, what? What? She was like, Savoy, something. I was like, you mean the Savoy Ballroom? Yeah, in Harlem. I'm like, just casually, you just went.
So we should probably contextualize that, because I'm not sure everyone knows the historic significance of the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem, and that being a center for jazz and innovative social dance coming out of a Black tradition, and frankly, a lot of integration, which is part of how a lot of those ballrooms got shut down because of the opposition to Black people and white people integrating, because this music was dance music, and it absolutely comes from a Black American base, but it was music for everyone, and it was America's popular music.
At that time, yeah.
Yeah.
And just the fact that she was even able to save enough to travel from Virginia to New York just to dance, like that depth of importance to movement and sharing with the best, I guess, or those who are considered them the best. I guess I got that, honestly.
Yeah.
But she taught me my first swing out. Of course, she didn't call it a swing out. She just said, this is how we danced. And listening to Louis Armstrong, which she always did, she told me, run, jump, and squat. Hold my hand and run, jump, squat. And run, jump, and squat. And for all my Lindy Hoppers in the room, I know you guys are now like, oh yeah, that's legit. that checks out. And it just continued from there. Gratefully, I was sharing with Melanie and some other folks last night, or the other night, a photo of my uncle when he was, I guess he was 12. No, yes, he was 12 because we're very close in age. And his pop lock troupe, all of them on the rocks with their suits and their white gloves. Very Beach Street. It was dope.
Yes, very, very 1980.
Very 1980. And it's always been surrounding me.
So one of the things that I think is interesting, because when we met, which 2008 maybe, I knew you as LaTasha, the hip hop house dancer. I did not know you as LaTasha, who does Lindy, and so. And I know that there are people who kind of only know you as LaTasha, who does Lindy and solo jazz. And so I'm curious, like, what was that transition for you?
That's an interesting question. It honestly really started to become even more of a requirement as I started to see the calling of me serving as a tradition bearer for African American social dance styles become more obvious, become more crystalline in everything that I did. It was that weekend, actually, meeting Miss Karen.
Oh, yeah. So we were at, what was that event called?
Augusta
something in West Virginia. It was arranged by a woman named Emily Olson. And she used to run a now defunct dance program at one of the colleges in West Virginia. And she started this summer event that was around vernacular dancing of all kinds.
Yeah, and music.
Yeah, and specifically there was I feel like an Appalachian slant to it. But she was really invested in bringing in Blackness and specifically bringing in Black vernacular dance forms. And so we met because my mentor was there, Miss Karen Hubbard, who is retiring very soon from UNC Charlotte. And she studied with a man named Pepsi Bethel, who is, iconic but unsung.
Yes, true.
And Karen's one of the few people to retain what his class structure was and what the vocabulary was, and it was sort of very hard to find people who knew Pepsi's work. You could find a lot of Frankie disciples,
yes,
I think, a lot of Frankie disciples and a lot of normal disciples, but Pepsi was in this sort of niche because, like LaTasha, he was bridging concert dance and social dance. He was performing on stages. I have a photo of his dance company and I bought it off of eBay, and on the back of it, the sticker says that he was performing at some place in the Catskills. There used to be all those summer performances. And so his company would go up there in the summer and perform. And so then you fall into this Lindy place. Yeah. And I think you just named something that's really important that we just need to kind of call out and name. And it's, why is it important to be a tradition bearer, and truly what is the history of jazz where we would need tradition bearers? Yes. Because that really is the story of why this kind of work needs to be presented. So I'm gonna let you speak on it, and then I'm gonna be like your Greek chorus and just sort of pipe in, yeah.
And I apologize if my earrings are jangling in the mic. I mean, fashion, just saying. Priorities. But in that regard, it was such an interesting calling in that moment, in that weekend, seeing the overlap, wanting to know and understand more about why some of the things I saw being shared in her class and other jazz classes, vernacular jazz classes at that time, as they were being distinguished, why they were so similar to the hip hop movement, to house movement, to juking movement, to DC hand dance movement. I really just wanted to understand why these things were similar. And nobody could really suss out for me why. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just learn the thing and feel out why, if maybe there is some way to feel why. And in my process of documenting how I felt why, I stumbled into a process. And it was a process of unlocking these connections for other people. And I fully never intended to set out to be this tradition bearer and do this thing. I wanted to recognize and uplift the Blackness that I saw was inherent in it, but also absent somehow. It was still very much Black social dance, but there was something missing in the pot. And I didn't know then, logistically, strategically, forecasting wise, how to bring more Black people into the space. All I knew how to do was be present.
Yeah,
I figured if I could share that with others, that even though it is a bit of a monochromatic presentation sometimes, that this is still our space because it's holding our art.
Yeah, so I'm going to say the thing you're not saying, okay? Which is,
I didn't say it.
I'm going to say it. Because we have to name it for people to understand what we're talking about. Okay, so the history of popular music in America, which is in the way that it functions with popular dance, is that it has been primarily Black, and as music and dance styles evolve, these traditions that she's talking about sort of were in less in vogue, but the way it gets framed in the history so much of the time is like hip hop is so completely separate from jazz, and that's false. That's a completely false, ahistorical, frankly, narrative, right? What happened for all of those great dancers from the Frankie Mannings, Norma Millers, Dawn Hamptons era, the Whitey's, Lindy Hoppers, the Savoy Ballroom era, and frankly the tap dancers too, is that when you get to sort of 1960 and forward, there's less work for them, right? Rock and roll changed some things, the musical Oklahoma changed some things, and there was just less work for them. But they found that abroad, particularly in European countries, people wanted to work from them and learn from them. And so they went to places like Sweden, where Harangue Dance Camp has been happening for a long time. Yeah. And they took those traditions that it seemed like no one here was really that interested in. Seemed like. I'm choosing my words really carefully, yes. Right? Yes. And taught those dance styles there, which is great because they're still alive and there's people who have firsthand knowledge of working with them. However, the byproduct of that is when you look at the global Lindy Hop scene, it is predominantly white. Yeah. And we're talking about a Black American art form.
And when you look at the global hip hop and house dance scene, it's primarily white also. And it's really fascinating that we had the same phenomena happening that happened in the past in jazz, happening again in hip hop, and now happening again with online dance culture.
Yes.
It seems to continue to perpetuate in a way that no one understands. But we all understand what's happening. We just have a problem stopping it and also making sure we stay present as things move into different spaces.
And so I think what we're trying to contextualize here by naming this is, yes, we inherently understand that social dances are meant to be shared and danced with the people. It's not the who gets to do it, it's who gets to say that they created it. Right. Right? The contextualizing of origin and how that functions with disenfranchisement and systemic racism is the thing that we're talking about here. And so what LaTasha's done on this stage for you all this week of drawing that line from the earliest of jazz to things that are happening literally on TikTok right now is filling some really significant gaps in the way that history gets told.
Yes. Okay. That's the hope. Anyway. And also in the process. And as Melanie has been even more privy to than most, in addition to bridging those gaps performatively and visually, building up and girding our artists who are in this work to also stand in that gap and to carry the knowledge of the things that they're gaining from this experience as well to the communities that they're a part of that may or may not be fully aware of how important and how impactful jazz actually is to what they do now. We have our running joke. Miss Dawn said to me once that she looked at jazz like, and it's not a villain in that sense, but like the character that was always captured at the end of Scooby-Doo, and then he unmasked, and it was the person that they thought it was in the beginning, but they overlooked.
If it wasn't for those meddling kids, I would have been successful. Right.
But she says the mask underneath the mask is basically like it's jazz. She's like, they capture it and it's like it's hip hop, and he takes it off and it's like, ha, it's jazz. They capture it and it's, light feet or beat your feet and it's like, ha, it's jazz. Like underneath it all, it's always jazz, and it's always coming out of this desire to be present, to represent ourselves, to tell our stories, and to celebrate our stories together in concert with the music and in agreement with the music. But that is something that, as we were sharing, many times we discussed a lot of academic, and intellectualized ideas about this. It really was just really challenging listening to my elders put on in one way in a particular space and then sharing something else when they were in private with me. And I'm like, how am I supposed to stand in this if you don't actually speak to it when you're out in front of people? We're not going to be able to make and hold space for your people if you don't let people know that this is still of us. I love and appreciate everything that you've done, and I understand why you had to do some of the things that you had to do, but you need to fix it. You need to say, this is still Black art. This is still for Black people. This is still for us to tell our stories. It's great that we get to celebrate it in a global capacity.
Yes.
Just as you shared so beautifully in your pre-show talk. But we have to stop adapting to accommodate everybody all the time. We can make space sometimes. We're confident in that in relationships, and it still baffles me. In relationship conversations, consent, setting boundaries, making sure that you communicate these things. Dance is no different.
Yes.
Dance is the ultimate communicator.
More intimate in a lot of ways.
More intimate in a lot of ways. You're saying things that you haven't even said to yourself sometimes out loud on that stage. And if you're not asserting in that moment, this is my space. The people that I come from, the people that I celebrate, the people that I love are welcome here. And you have to deal with that if you're going to celebrate me in this space. Then you're messing up.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about intergenerationality and how it fits into your work? Well, even within the cast, I'm not going to give anyone's age, but there's a range of ages in the cast. I think I'm probably the oldest of the crew, but and that also ties to you sitting at the feet of all of these elders. And so obviously that sort of intergenerational thing that happens within Black families and multiple generations living in a home is part of it. But I'm curious about its prominence in your actual dance practice.
And it is that prominent because of my upbringing and my experience. I don't know if we talked in detail about this, but I was in that deeply intergenerational household.
Yeah.
It's me, my mother, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother, all in the same house for 18 years. Love them to life. But when it was time to go, yeah. I digress. But in this nurturing and reciprocal celebration and picking and elevating and challenging environment was how I learned to navigate the world. And it's not a surprise that it was also how I learned to navigate the capital D dance world. We make a lot of, some of us make a point to really adhere to these hip hop labels and house labels and jazz and experimental dance and all of these other kind of things. And we understand why, and it does help situate and help some people find their place. But you do reach a certain point where you recognize that it's all just movement and communication. And if you don't regard it as such, you're going to miss your opportunity to be what you're supposed to be in regard to that. And that was what I learned at home. If I constantly just looked at myself as the little kid, then I was going to miss my opportunity to be in the kitchen with my great-grandmother, to learn the things that she needed to pass on to me, or to be with my mom in her in-home salon. Mm-hmm. To learn the things that she needed to teach me about how to care for myself or how to care for my friends, or how to make money doing so. But in the context of dance, I recognized the value. I'm so grateful that I was surrounded by others who also recognized that value of having someone who was more experienced, not in every single way, but in some ways, and to be able to differentiate between someone being a be-all, which thankfully none of the people in this cast have that ego issue. Right. But to recognize that there are some people who can help you in the business mind of things. And also they have this hidden understanding of the idiosyncrasies of Prince,
She's talking about me right now.
Just say. But then also can tell you why Charlie Parker and UB Blake are who they are. It's okay, yeah, you need those people too. Or to have someone who can teach you how to make your own clothes, or to also stand in your musical choices, even if they don't seem to be aligning with what your generation is celebrating or wanting you to accept about the music that you're listening to.
Yeah.
So the power of having shoulders to stand upon in your creative process, as opposed to reaching a place and then being elevated. That's what the intergenerational experience has allowed for, and my personal experience, and I hope for most of the cast as well.
Yeah, I observe it as being this sort of really efficient path to freedom. Like the thing you're talking about is the people who call themselves, I'm the hip hop dancer, or I'm the light feet dancer, or I'm the whatever. I think for a lot of folks watching what you do, it seems like, oh, this is super complicated, but it actually removes some of the complexity by not having to sort of uphold these really rigid lines of what's what and who's who, and to have a conversation about Marjorie Smarth, house legend Marjorie Smarth 1 minute, and then to have a discussion about Mabley the next minute, and they're what 50 years apart, 60
years apart,
yeah, in age, yeah.
And that's a really apt alignment.
Well, you know,
there
I'm
too,
smart,
you know?
yeah.
Especially in, and this is just a little peek inside my brain. You saying Marjorie immediately makes me think, well, first of all, her hugs. And then second, her legs, how they moved. And then you said Mabel. And then, of course, anybody who knows Mabel Lee, those legs. Just thinking about how they both were able to say so much, just the tiniest movement. And they just enamor an entire room and take over an entire song with just a single step. And they were both amazingly prolific women who just stood in their power in the moment. They had other things going on in their lives too.
Of course,
that they had to navigate, but in that moment, they could say the thing that they really intended to say and show up in the world in a way that they sometimes felt that they could not elsewhere.
So I'm glad that we're talking about women, because I feel like your role as a woman doing this work is important. Not only being a woman, or a Black woman, I should be real specific about that, your role as a Black woman doing this work. But I do think, particularly the way you talk about your experience with Miss Norma and Miss Dawn, and even the way you got so giddy and excited about Diane Walker attending your masterclass for the school earlier in the week. I mean, Diane Walker, legend Diane Walker, tap. I just gotta say, if y'all don't know, you know. But there's something about women doing this work that we are socialized to be caretakers, right? And and I know the stories about how, like when Dormisha and Derek were touring with Black and Blue, how Miss Diane took care of them, like really took care of them, right? And because their parents were not on tour with them. And I've seen a version of that with you, just in the time that we've been there. And it wasn't like it was foreign, like I knew it was happening, but like I saw a lot of it over the past 2 weeks. And I feel like it's tied to this idea of being a tradition bearer, as also being a caretaker of people, places, and things. Yeah, like, so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around your womanness and your Black womanness and doing the true labor that you're doing. I mean, the artistry, yes, the artistry is happening, but there's also a lot of labor, a lot of hidden labor that's happening in what you're doing. And so I just want you to speak to it.
I don't know if I can.
Girl, start talking. Come on.
I know. I'm just in that space of I might cry thinking about it. Just to frame it in that way. There's been a lot of opposition to me doing this work, even from people who I thought were in my corner to start. And things have worked themselves out, but I love the way when Black women specifically, recognize that we have a job to do. That it literally is a game of you can get steamrolled or you can get on board. And I'm grateful that I take that from my great-grandmother and from my mother and from my entire lineage and add to that the force and the power of Miss Norma, Miss Dawn, Miss Barbara, Miss Sugar, who are still with us, thankfully, and Marjorie.
Mickey.
And Miss Mickey. And Michelle. And you. And I'm just grateful that as I know I have to make those hard choices of some relationships to sever, some people to upset in the process, some styles to dismantle only to rebuild, that I know that I have the fortitude to do that. That I can trust that the other women who are on this pathway with me, even if it's not in the exact same way, we say got each other's back, but got my feet.
Yeah.
I like to say, because it's not in the ego sense, but in the remaining standing. You guys keep me grounded to keep me moving forward, to keep us all moving forward. And it's the sacrifices of that, the constant reimaginings of your life and how that's gonna look and how that's gonna flow. The necessity of detachment in doing this work, and not just in the sense of, or like a lamentable sense of like not being able to have a family or be with people or do that kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, just being centered in this, you can't. I'll do my push-ups later, guys. You really have to choose.
So when they say can't, LaTasha makes them drop down and do, how's it, 10, 20 push-ups? So LaTasha said can't. Let's get that on record.
But it's in alignment again with that caretaking notion, right? There's far too much belief and empowerment and place holding and space making and drive and drawing out happening in this space and in this work for you to negate it. And I'm not gonna deal with it. And if that's the headspace that you're in, now you need to work that out. Literally. We're gonna associate some forced effort every time you try to negate the power of what you're doing. And that's self-reflective.
Yeah.
I know, just like Michelle continues to reiterate, my amazing production manager and a wonderful friend, Michelle Bird McPhee. Mm-hmm. Yes.
You saw her dance a little bit tonight. She got up in the line dance and did it.
She continues to say that too. Like, just, no, we stand in the gap for each other.
Yeah.
We do. And we're not going to allow each other to fall and fail. Like, it's just not something we do. And it's, we can clap for that. But just we celebrated, a milestone for her yesterday. But she constantly reminds me, giving birth to this project has been, as you described it, as my life's work, and I'm still like, but I'm still going. Is it done? Are we finished?
I didn't say you completed the work. I just named it.
But exactly like that. That's part and parcel of that labor, right, for ourselves. Like detaching from what we've been taught some language is supposed to mean about the work that we do or how we stand in the world. That seems to have been one of the more crucial exercises for me, to even be able to push blues right up against R&B.
Yeah.
Or to put hand clapping rhythms right next to big band swing, or to jam it right there in between. Like, Brazilian overlaid with house music. Like, who does that?
A thing that I recognize in you with the kind of work I've had to do, and I see it in Michelle too. Is Michelle here? I see it in Michelle too. Which is, there comes this society, once you figure out the passion of it, like, this is the thing I think I love, it's the thing I want to pursue, there becomes this decisive moment where you say, I've decided this is important, as opposed to waiting for someone to allow it to be important.
Yes.
Yeah. And why Lindy? Like, it could have been anything, like,
right? And
could have been anything within the lineage. Like, why Lindy?
I was saying that earlier today as we were talking about some of the press that's gone out. And the Lindy in particular was just the catalyst for the revisiting, for the initiation of my awareness of my place inside the continuum, right? It's not about the Lindy. It's about my Blackness. And it's about my understanding of how that's tethered to everything else.
Yes.
For the nerds in the room, it's entanglement theory, But the Lindy, quite literally, in its shaping, the momentum of this shared energy back and forth and creating is what made me realize that that's literally what I was doing. I felt my grandmother when I was over here, then I felt my cousins in this one moment of a shuffle ball change at the end of a pass by. And I'm like, oh, I can put this here. Why does it still fit? Oh, because I'm still holding on to this grounded practice, this grounded principle. It's like, well, what's that grounded practice and principle in this style? Oh, that feels a lot like this. Well, that feels a lot like this. So this is probably this and could also possibly be this that informed this. But this looks a lot like this now, but it didn't look like that then. What? Oh, because that person was actually of this and they went back to this too and infused this thing with this other element of being and existing, which then sired another way of functioning in that style that had already generated itself. So it just keeps folding back in on itself and producing new art, new ways of expressing. And I'm like, oh, it's not just the art, it's us as people too.
But you know what's interesting about that though? I feel like for a variety of reasons, we're more equipped to be able to recognize that in music than we are in dancing. Why do you think, like, and I'm talking about from the same Black artistic traditions, we're more able to see how those different musical, you know, like how gospel intersects with the blues, intersects with jazz, intersects with, you know, R&B, intersects with funk, intersects with hip hop, intersects with house, intersects with techno. Like we're able to see like, oh, this person's played with that person and they brought this into it. But dance, we seem to, maybe it's not we. People seem to segregate dance. And then there are blinders on.
Yeah.
To that, which is one of the reasons why the jazz continuum seems so revolutionary, because we're not actually talking about dance in the way that you're putting it together. Yeah. Like we're not dealing with that way. We're not teaching the classes that way. Everything's always so discreet. Yeah. What is it about dance that's different from the music? And the reason I'm asking this is because the music is so critical to our understanding of the dance.
It is. It is. And this is something that I think our musical director, John, was asking earlier today. What's up, John?
John Thomas.
John Thomas. And it's not, for those who are like, oh, when I say this question, you're like, well, he was a part of the show. Like, how did he not know this? And it's not one of those you should know question. It's something that you continue to unpack even as you get into this thing. And, you know, he was curious why, same question, why the music and dance have become so separated. And it's interesting that you use the word segregated because it is a learned behavior.
Yes.
As people have endeavored to segregate people, they try to do the same thing with the labels of things, which is why I like to throw them off as often as possible. But in that, from this colonized notion of separation and isolation to separate or celebrate rather also, the music was set apart from the dance in order to take out some of the wildness that comes about when Black people are really allowed to let loose and live, or when Black music is really allowed space to let live, because that was things that you can find in old newspaper clippings, people talking about how young white teenagers were being infected by the spirit of the Lindy Hop, and it's the wild jungle dance, and they're gonna be taken over. And you're like, I'm sorry, what? You're welcome? What do you mean? What do you say? But in that, like, sadly, you have to get into that disassociated, disparate, oh, these things should never be aligned space to really understand why they were separated in the first place.
Yes.
And to acknowledge, again, just like the show, one of the explorations, the acknowledgement is always key. Acknowledging why these things were set apart. I don't want to get too much into it because it's whatever. They did it. It was stupid. We learned. You know better when you know better. Was it you do better when you learn better, know better?
If you know better, do better.
Yeah, that part. Maya Angelou. And so in my knowing better now, it's in that effort that we continue to build the jazz continuum to showcase that. Like, no, it is not just in this binary way of thinking, right? The music and the dance, the music and the dance. It's like, no. there's this XYZ axis that exists also, where everything is everything and nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the music inspires the dance, which inspires the artist, that inspires the music, that inspires the dancers, that inspires the movement, that inspires, and it just continues to cycle back upon itself when we allow it to. When we get in its way, however, that's when things tend to bifurcate and be set apart in a way that is not actually helpful to anything or anybody, honestly.
Yeah. There's a people don't talk about it a lot, but there is this unspoken hierarchy in the arts in terms of, like the rankings of forms. Now you're laughing, John, but music's at the top and dance is at the bottom.
Yes.
So
all the dance educators. Yes, sir.
I mean, in terms of how we engage with art forms, in terms of how we fund art forms, in terms of how we have access to art forms, and that thing that you were just naming, that you were just talking about, also speaks to that, about the fact that we have less understanding is because we rank things and we choose, and it's willful, is what I guess I'm trying to say. It's willful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not out of a place of, especially for those who are art enthusiasts, right? It's not intentionally malicious.
Yeah.
However, if you experience a thing and you don't bother to take some time to Google it and even learn some incorrect things that might lead you to some factual, more truthful things.
Google is free, Wikipedia is dangerous. Yeah.
Right? But to at least allow it to expand your mind about how to research and gain some knowledge about this thing that you've just consumed and enjoyed.
Yes.
If you don't take the mantle of actually being responsible for this experience that you just had, then it was for nothing.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of the continuum. That's the point of artistry in and of itself. You have an experience. You have a responsibility to care for that experience in the way that you share it with other people. Like we talk about seeing a good movie, and how do you tell people, like, oh my goodness, yes, and it was starring so-and-so, and they did this, and they alluded to, this thing in this book that, that everybody's read, that we all understand and never really wanted to bother with. Yeah, they actually approached it in this way, but then they flipped it and made this entire other thing, and it's amazing. Not only did you just talk about the movie and gain a fan for the movie, you just made 5 other points of reference that people can look to learn more about the thing. And you actually expanded their minds about what they were going to see by letting them know that it was inverted from where they thought the thing was going to go.
Yeah.
Because you cared.
Yes.
You cared about the experience that you had enough to actually look up those correlations that you thought of in the moment to make sure that you were really rooted in that when you share it. People don't take that same care with dance. And it pisses me off, frankly.
Yes.
It's really annoying. And not in the cute, like, oh, this is so amazing. No. Like, you want to punch some people in the face sometimes. Like, really? You just want us to stand here and dance for you, and then you go on about your business, and that's it?
Yeah. And that's the thing I was trying to say in my introduction to the show about, we took a lot of care to maintain the environment in which these dances occur. And this is not a performance for you. All right. You're being welcomed into a thing, but there's a version of that performing for you that's grounded in exploitation, and we're disinterested in that.
Extremely.
Yeah. We reject that as a principle.
Yeah.
I think we should go to some questions. So the comment was about our wonderful dancing saxophonist, Christopher McBride, and having him dance being emblematic of that relationship between dance and music. I have to say, we sort of called him out of his hibernating cave, and then by the time we got to the end of the performance, he was ready. He was ready to do it.
And I will say, this was, as we talk about that, like that was, as they've started to call me a mad scientist, maniacal artist, all of the things, that was a part of having the artists in the residency this time. In the initial processing of this work with Works in Process. Shout out Duke Dang. And Caroline Crompton. We sadly weren't able to organize them in time or have enough funding to bring absolutely everybody to the residency experience. And that version of the show was still like, oh, whoa. But having the musical artists be here to experience the dance process and to contribute to the dance process and to be in the dance process, like literally, they were there through our warm-ups. Some of them even started having their own little workout troops every morning. Everybody started the line dances, whether you could keep up or not. Like you still were present in the space and you just turned in the right direction when time was necessary. I wasn't going to out you, John.
We weren't going to out you, John, but I feel like I need to just contextualize this so that everyone understands. One of the things that the Pillow was able to do this year was to have residencies for artists who were coming to perform, because the reality is people were not in rehearsal for much of 2020. And in order to be able to get to a place where we would have work that was ready to go on stage, some of them were gathering their full ensembles together upon arriving here. And so there's been several performances this summer where we were giving them residencies when they arrived. So LaTasha Barnes' group was here for a week in rehearsal with the dramaturg, and that got us stage ready, and they weren't the only group to be able to have that, and it's pretty fundamental. Like we're really grateful to be able to do that, because frankly, it would have impacted what was able to be on the stage this summer. There would have been a completely different festival had we not been able to facilitate that.
And one of the more crucial things too that we've spoken about at length and will continue to speak about is that even though this particular structural iteration of the Jazz Continuum number 2, is framed as it is, every show is completely different. Every single show is completely different. And every time we depart and come back together, we need days, time to resituate ourselves in this family of choice, in this experience of sharing who we are and who we understand ourselves to be in relation to this music that we celebrate and carry, and this movement that we celebrate and carry. So the show, I think you alluded to that in your pre-show talk, you change out one dancer from a segment and it's completely different.
Yeah.
And that's true of the enther show.
Yes, absolutely.
There's no
one plays like Chris. Chris plays like Chris. No one plays like John. Exactly. No one plays like Ulysses. They are, individuals unto themselves, and the same can be said of the dancers. Yeah. Another question from the audience? Yes. I'm going to summarize the statement by saying, wow, because I think that was the general sentiment, is that Miss LaTasha Barnes, wow, And another question? Yeah? All right, let me just restate the question. And so the question was about, LaTasha taught a class this morning at 10 o'clock over in our Great Lawn tent. And at the end of that class, she said, well, now that I've shared this with you, it's incumbent upon you to take this on and also share it with others and also carry it forward. And the question is, how does one do that? Even if one is already a believer and is ready to spread the gospel, what does the gospel spreading look like?
I know you love when I say this, but you answered your own question. You showed up. You showed up to gain the experience, to have personal awareness and regard for the thing. That's step one. And to me personally, as I've learned for myself in my own journey, that's been the most crucial step. And it's not necessarily to model what you're doing after what I did, but showing up is the first part. For those who have engaged me in academic settings, I talk often about my thesis, which was the absence of Blackness in African American social dance, cultural surrogacy and its effects, a notion I put forth about just how movement moves through communities and gets held and gestated by communities not of its origin and then moved throughout the world, and how that both affects and effects what happens on the outside of it. It's showing up. I opened my research with T.I.'s quote, "Where they at though?" And it wasn't about the music or the art, specifically. It was about Black people. Where are we at when it comes to being in the spaces where our art is? We've taken a back seat to celebrating in these spaces because, I'm just going to say the thing. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's too many white people for me. It's like, yeah, I understand that. But at some point, if you actually really do love and care for the thing, you've got to show up for it. And if that goes with you showing up for yourself first, great. If sadly it doesn't move beyond that, or if it takes 10, 15 years to move beyond just you, if it's worth it, then it's worth it. And that's not to diminish anyone else's experience or hardships that people have had to go through to try to hold the mantle. We're just talking about the fullness of the experience. It's not just one way. There's not just one way to do this. But the first thing to figuring any of it out is showing up. And the more that we get people to do that, the more we can continue to have spaces to celebrate this. Small, big, high, low, whatever we want to pretend to call it, space.
Yeah, curiosity is your greatest asset, right? Being curious about a thing and pursuing your interest in it with a balance of enthusiasm and reverence for it, right? So like part of the thing that I think we're up against is there are people who have a little bit of exposure to a thing, but they're running with some false narratives about its origin, about attributing proper credit, about actually just the whole evolution and history of the form, who gets credit for things. I mean, LaTasha and I could have a whole other panel talk, frankly, about the intersection of whiteness and blackness and jazz dance in the United States and how that plays into theatrical jazz dance, and a specific series of white men being called the fathers of jazz, right? Which is a completely false. It's so ahistorical. And honestly, one of those men even said all jazz dance comes from the Lindy. So the history is all wrong. But I'm naming this to say there's an excavation that you have to do if you're gonna spread the gospel. You got to do that excavation so that what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
Right? Enthusiasm is the place that you start, but you got to undergird that with information.
Yeah.
And accurate information, which is the thing I was saying about Google is free, Wikipedia is dangerous. There's a lot of false information out there on the internet. And so you got to do your due diligence. LaTasha is blessed because she is one of the last generation to study with the folks who actually made the thing. Right? And I'm talking about that early jazz era. But we still have time with our hip hop founders. We still have time with our house founders, right? We still have time for the people who are creating now. And so how are we documenting their stories? Because that's the other thing. There's just a complete absence of documentation.
Especially on our part. And this was the primary reason I went into ethnochoreology as opposed to just anthropology. It's about the cultural origin points of our art. And understanding, yes, I want to get it on camera and get it noted. But sometimes me just sitting here and being present and taking in their story verbally is going to have to be the thing. And I'm going to have to find a way to continue to reflect on this and try to siphon out other bits of this to strengthen this story. Just like you were talking about undergirding, it's not just with us individually, it's with the art as well. The same thing that we apply to our individual lives, we have to apply to the art. The art is the container of our lived experiences. It should be treated no differently.
Yeah.
The same way that we regard ourselves is how we should regard our art. And that's why I keep going back to, it sounds too simple, but showing up is the beginning of the thing. And even if you have showed up in the past and you have your issues for not continuing to show up, maybe reconsider. Just a little bit. Try to show up again. See what might sit differently with you now.
Yeah.
If it still is not for you, it's fine. It happens.
Yeah.
But show up for each other and for our art.
So I think we have time for one last question. So the question is, well, first let me say there was a comment about how Don Hampton and several other elders would be proud, and I completely concur. But the question is, what's the next American partner dance?
Well, he's gonna choke me for this. Say if my brother and cast member Tadrick Hill has his way, it would be some sort of acrobatic power Lindy. And I say power Lindy, and people are like, but isn't Lindy Hop already acrobatic? It's like, yeah, but
Tydrick's on some other stuff.
The things that Tydrick would like to do with the dance, once we get to a place of sourcing out how to maintain momentum and connection in his ideas, that's going to be, yeah. I'll make that declaration. But in terms of globally, one of the things that I love seeing celebrated more now are all of the facets of Black social dance culture, right? So seeing, which you saw on the stage as well, there was some hustle happening with some two-step, with some salsa, as well as, why am I losing the names of the dances that I choreographed? Mambo, yes, thank you. Cheese and rice. All the things celebrated in the same musical structure, finding their swing in the context of the music that was being played. And I think, for me personally, the thing I would love to see is more of that versus just, this is the next big sensation. A celebration of partner dancing, period, in all of its forms. And to see that in alignment with people celebrating independent, like solo movement as well. Because we all know, or I always say that and then negate it, because
everyone doesn't know it. So,
but it should be known that in order to be an effective partner dancer, you yourself need to be an effective independent mover. Because I mean, if you can't celebrate by yourself, I don't want to celebrate with you. I'm not gonna mess up my flow. Just saying. So in that regard, the next partner dancing I would like to see is people partnering more with themselves. And then partnering with others tactily. Yeah.
Okay, so we sadly have come to the end of our Pillow Talk. Please give a round of applause for Miss LaTasha Barnes. I love you. Thank you.